Obviously, when one gets a text message at 10 o'clock on a Saturday night, um, one is not expecting that from Pastor Janet, who tested herself just last night and found she had tested positive for COVID. And what is unusual is the fact that usually I never check my phone after about 9:30. I usually in bed reading, and it just happened that as I was reaching to turn off the bedside lamp at 10 o'clock, it beeped, and it was Pastor Janet saying, unfortunately, I affected myself and I'm positive for COVID. I'm not going to do. So I said, okay, well, I'm not going to remind anyone of my friends. Although I got back up, went out into the living room and found what I did read through all three of these things. And I said, Lord, okay, I can't see your stuff. Obviously, this is not a sermon. What I'm going to do is just kind of highlight a few things that strike me about each of these readings, or at least the first reading in the gospel. Luckily, this Sunday and next Sunday are both about the calling of the disciples. This week from the first chapter of John, and next week from the first chapter of Mark, the calling of the first disciples. And the two Sundays following, I think, are healing miracles. I love this story of Samuel that Neil read so well just a few minutes ago. We've had this story about half a year ago, I think, last year, and it is one of those fascinating little stories. Samuel, who was finally promised as a child to Hannah and her husband, and Hannah had been barren, and finally God gave her a son. And on Thanksgiving, Hannah decided, I'm going to dedicate my child Samuel to God. So she sends her young son to live with Eli, his elderly priest, in the synagogue. And so Eli is really, well, probably younger in my opinion now, but at that time was an old guy and his eyesight was not very good. And young Samuel was sleeping probably in another part of the tent or wherever. And all of a sudden, in the middle of the night, Samuel hears his voice. And Samuel gets up and goes to old Eli and says, yes, you called me? And Eli responds, you back to bed. Go back to sleep. I mean, what are you talking about? And Eli probably was thinking in his mind, like some grandparents might do, of saying, these children. And a little while later, Samuel hears the voice again. And he goes to Eli, and Eli says, I didn't call you. Go back to sleep. And the third time it happens, Eli realizes it's God speaking to Samuel. And so Samuel, the next time it happens, actually says, yes, Lord, speak, your servant is listening. Now, if that happened to one of your children or grandchildren, you might think, I don't know, my child is hearing things. Maybe you need to take him or her to a doctor, to a psychiatrist, to somewhere to get help. When we hear somebody who says, I'm hearing God speaking to me, we think that person might be a little bit A little off the wall. And how many people over the centuries have said, God has spoken to me and I'm here to help your country or save you or do whatever. And we find that that person sometimes is very misled. Centuries ago, there was a young girl in France who believed God was actually speaking to her and to lead the French people. And what did the leaders of the church do? They had her arrested, put in prison, and burned at the stake. And yet Joan of Arc became one of the great heroes of French history. If I asked how many of you have ever heard God speaking directly to you in a voice, even if you have, you might be afraid of raising your hand because the rest of us, I think, how come she got to hear God's voice? Or how come that person seems to me? Does God speak to us? Yes, we believe that we come to church and God speaks to us in the Word, in the liturgy, and the sermon, hopefully. But do we hear the voice of God? The choir anthem in a few minutes. Lord, let us listen when you speak. Sometimes the voice of God gets muffled to our ears because we don't pay attention to it. These young fishermen, mostly, in John and Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, as they're called to be disciples and followers, Jesus is physically there and calling them. So there is a difference. And the weird thing with the Nathaniel story is that you think, well, how did you see me sitting under the fig tree? And Nathaniel realizes in this account that this guy is different. But we don't have the physical Jesus standing in front of us, calling us or telling us what to do. But Jesus is there. The Holy Spirit is there, calling us, and we need to listen. And sometimes I think that what we have labeled our conscience might be the voice of God. Because each of us, when we are in a situation where, for example, something happens, either you're driving and a driver cuts you off, or you're in line at the grocery store and somebody just is having a bad day and cuts in line in front of you. And there's a time where you want to respond, maybe not in the nicest way, but something in your mind, your head, your conscience says, that could be the voice of God saying, let it go. Do not be afraid. Many times we've heard that. Love your enemies. The voice of God speaks to us every day, constantly. And all we need to do is let the clutter that's in our mind disappear and listen. The practice that many people who learn and study meditation of just sitting and letting God speak. The Quakers have always had talent in a very good way. Even though I love the liturgy, I love the fact that the liturgical music and all of that, obviously, but there is something to be said about sitting in silence and letting God speak. And perhaps in these readings today, that's what God is saying to us.